Welcome to the deep dive. So, imagine finding out that your local, reliable accountant, the person who has just meticulously filed your taxes and balanced your books for the last 20 years.
Right, the safe bet.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Imagine finding out they're secretly using their weekend hours to build a commercial nuclear reactor in their garage.
You'd immediately question their sanity.
You really would. You'd wonder, is this a stroke of visionary genius or just a complete catastrophic misallocation of capital?
Right, right.
And today, we are bringing you into a story of a technology company doing exactly that. We've got a stack of financial filings, operational updates, white papers here, and our mission today is to unpack what might honestly be the most jarring corporate pivot of the decade.
It's the absolute definition of structural whiplash. I
Yeah.
mean, we are looking at a company that has spent a quarter of a century, 25 years, perfecting software for car dealerships.
Yeah.
And now, suddenly, they're attempting to manufacture advanced semiconductor hardware for artificial intelligence and aerospace.
Which is just, it's wild. The company is IZMO Limited. And just to give you a sense of how entrenched their original business is, if you've ever rented a car online or shopped for a vehicle on a major portal, you've almost certainly interacted with their technology.
Oh, absolutely.
For 25 years, they've basically been taking highly complex 3D pictures of cars and building the back-end dealership software to support the auto retail market. They currently power, something like 80% of global rental car listings?
Yeah, around 80%. And they serve Fortune 10 automotive OEMs, the actual car builders like Ford and Honda. That is their core DNA.
Right. It's a classic software as a service operator.
Exactly, a SaaS model.
Yeah.
They provide the digital retail infrastructure, the auto data analytics. They build the digital showrooms, manage the CRM databases, and run the predictive maintenance algorithms for massive, massive dealership networks.
But then, you turn the page on their latest filings and the narrative just completely fractures.
And it breaks entirely.
Yeah. This exact same company, using the cash flows from that stable software business, has just opened a Class 1000 clean room in Bangalore, India.
Right, and they haven't opened it to write more code.
No, they opened it to physically manufacture semiconductor packaging, specifically for space payloads and high-density AI data centers.
Management actually refers to this as their dual-engine strategy.
Dual engine.
Yeah. The premise is, it's audacious. Use the high-margin revenue from an entrenched legacy software business to self-fund a highly capital-intensive, extremely high-risk venture into advanced hardware engineering.
Which brings us to the core mission of our analysis today. We're going to stress test this dual engine strategy. We really need to figure out if the underlying math and market dynamics actually support this ambition.
Because before you can evaluate the semiconductor moonshot,
Yeah,
you have to understand the cash cow that's supposedly paying for the rocket fuel.
exactly. So let's start with the foundation. How did IZMO build such a fortress in the automotive sector to begin with?
Well, to understand their moat, you have to break down how their revenue is segmented. The largest piece of their financial pie, which is roughly 42% of their total revenue, comes from a division called IZMO Studio.
Okay, IZMO Studio.
Yeah, this is their interactive media wing.
Mm-hmm.
And their primary competitive advantage here is just pure scale. They actually own the world's largest proprietary automotive image and 3D animation library.
See, I look at a claim like that, and my initial reaction is, okay, sure, they have a giant hard drive full of car photos.
Right, like a massive Flickr account or something.
Yeah, exactly. But digging into the source material, the physical reality of what they're doing is vastly more complicated than just, sending a photographer out to a dealership lot with a DSLR.
Exponentially more complex.
Yeah.
I mean, they are not just taking photographs. They are capturing raw spatial data. They use these advanced CGI frameworks and cutting-edge laser scanning technology to create incredibly dense, mathematically perfect 3D virtual showrooms. Yeah, their flagship product for this is called IZMO Emporio. When they scan a vehicle, they're placing it on a specialized rig and literally hitting it with lasers to map millions of individual data points.
So they're getting the exact geometry of the car.
Precisely. They scan the exterior curves, the undercarriage, every single millimeter of the interior cabin.
So they're basically building what engineers call a CAD-level digital twin, a computer-aided design replica that's virtually indistinguishable from the physical vehicle.
Exactly. And the utility of that is massive for the B2B market, the business-to-business enterprise clients. We're talking about licensing this interactive media to the absolute giants of the industry.
Companies like Hertz, Avis, Microsoft, Porsche.
Right. When you're sitting at your laptop, browsing a massive rental site, and you click your mouse to grab a vehicle, and spin it around 360 degrees.
Or you open the virtual door and pan around to look at the infotainment screen.
Exactly. You are manipulating an IZMO asset. It creates this incredibly sticky B2B licensing model.
Yeah.
Because once a massive enterprise like Avis integrates IZMO's 3D library into their global booking engine, the switching costs are huge.
Yeah, to rip all that code out and replace it with a competitor's library, it would be an astronomical headache. It just generates a river of recurring revenue.
It really does.
But I have to push back hard on this, on the concept of this being a defensible moat in today's landscape.
Oh, because of AI.
Exactly. When I read that their core advantage is a library of images and 3D animations, my mind immediately jumps to generative AI. We're living in an era where anyone can open Midjourney or Stable Diffusion, type a prompt, and get a photorealistic image.
Sure.
Couldn't a well-funded startup just spin up tomorrow, train a fine-tuned generative model on publicly available car photos, and render hyper-realistic car interiors at like a fraction of what IZMO charges? Doesn't generative AI completely evaporate a 25-year manual scanning mode overnight?
It's a fair question. And if their end user was just a casual car blog looking for a shiny stock photo to put at the top of an article, you'd be absolutely correct.
Right.
But the enterprise reality diverges sharply from consumer AI tools. What IZMO provides is not just a visually pleasing render, it is OEM-certified, mathematically infallible domain expertise.
The word certified feels like the linchpin there.
It is the entire ballgame. When Ford, or a massive 500-location dealer network, licenses a 3D model to power their digital retail platform, that digital model carries immense financial and legal weight.
Right, because of false advertising.
Exactly. If a customer is ordering a $70,000 truck online based entirely on a digital render, the stitching on the leather seats and the animation must perfectly match the physical vehicle coming off the assembly line.
The exact angle of the touchscreen, the specific millimeter dimensions of the cargo space, everything.
The physical placement of the climate control buttons, it all has to be flawless. Generative AI, by its very architectural nature, is probabilistic.
Right. It guesses the next pixel based on training data.
It hallucinates. It might render a steering wheel that looks like a masterpiece of industrial design, but it hallucinated a cruise control button that doesn't actually exist on that specific trim level.
Oh, wow. Yeah, and if a customer buys that car expecting that button.
You've got a massive consumer protection liability. You're selling a high-value asset based on a misrepresentation. IZMO circumvents this entirely.
Because they have those 25 years of relationships with the actual manufacturers.
Right. They get early, pre-release access to the vehicles before they even hit the dealership lots. They physically scan the reality. A startup relying on generic generative AI simply cannot jump over that barrier of verified physical truth.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. The moat isn't the pixels. The moat is the guaranteed liability-free accuracy of those pixels.
Exactly.
And that studio segment, as we noted, is 42% of the pie. What fuels the rest of the core software engine?
The remaining revenue is split quite evenly between two other divisions. You have IZMO at 26% and Frog Data also at 26%.
Let's break down IZMO first. This appears to be the digital retail and CRM side, like the nuts and bolts operating system for running a modern car dealership.
Think of it as the foundational infrastructure for automotive e-retailing. It powers the dealership websites, manages the flow of parts distribution, and operates the CRM.
The customer relationship management software?
Right, for everything that happens after the sale, like scheduling service appointments and tracking customer touchpoints.
And when you look at the unit economics of selling this software to car dealers, it becomes incredibly clear why this is a cash generation machine. The sources detail that IZMO charges a base platform fee of roughly $1,500 per month per dealer.
And that $1,500 is just to get in the door.
Right, just the baseline.
Exactly. Once you factor in the essential add-ons, the specialized consulting services, the advanced derivative tracking tools, that monthly billing quickly scales up to roughly $3,500 per month per individual dealership.
For an enterprise software platform, $3,500 a month per location is phenomenal recurring revenue, especially when you consider the total addressable market.
Oh, the TAM is huge.
Yeah, right now, IZMO has over 2,000 dealers globally operating on this platform. But the estimated total number of auto dealers out there is somewhere between 100,000 and 150,000 globally.
So they're sitting at a low single-digit penetration rate. They've captured highly lucrative, deeply entrenched clients. But the sheer runway for organic growth just by adding new dealer logos to the roster is massive.
And then they layer Frog Data on top of all of that. Frog Data is their data intelligence and AI platform,
Right. This isn't the website interface. This is the back-end brain.
the brain that tells the dealer how to competitively price their inventory against the dealership down the street or how to optimize their service bay operations.
Or when to proactively order brake pads based on predictive maintenance models. And Frog Data is where IZMO really flexes a unique structural and geographical cost advantage.
Yeah, the sources specifically highlight that Frog Data utilizes highly advanced but low-cost AI models. They mention integrating open-source frameworks like DeepSeek.
And they combine these accessible AI models with their deep bench of engineering talent based in India,
The technical architecture mentioned in the filings is quite intense. They're building agent-centric architectures and zero ETL data lakes.
which is a huge deal.
Yeah, for the listener who isn't a database engineer, I should probably decode that. Zero ETL solves a massive headache in enterprise software. ETL stands for extract, transform, and load.
The old way of doing things.
Exactly. Historically, if a car dealer wanted to run analytics on their sales, the software had to physically extract the data from the sales database, transform it into a different format, and load it into a separate analytics warehouse.
It takes hours, it requires constant maintenance, and it's incredibly expensive.
But a zero ETL data lake means the AI can just look at the live data exactly where it sits in real time without moving it. Building that kind of seamless architecture is usually the domain of highly expensive Silicon Valley engineering teams.
Yet because IZO is leveraging their established footprint in Bangalore, they're delivering these incredibly sophisticated predictive systems at development costs that are 70% to 80% lower than their Western competitors.
It's the ultimate geographic arbitrage applied to enterprise AI. They're selling cutting-edge analytics to wealthy North American and European dealership groups at premium Western software price points, but their underlying development costs are anchored in the Indian labor market.
And the power of that geographic dynamic is heavily pronounced in their revenue mix. A staggering 72% of their total legacy revenue comes from North America.
Right. But they're not strictly a US-centric platform.
No, not at all. They are actually the undisputed #1 market leader for this specific software in France.
Which illuminates a much subtler but deeply critical moat: language and regional compliance. IZMO is positioned as the only truly multinational, multilingual platform in this specific niche of auto SaaS.
It's a huge advantage.
Yeah, put yourself in the shoes of a massive multinational dealer group operating across Europe, or a global OEM trying to standardize their digital retail experience worldwide. You can't roll out a bespoke software platform that only works in English and is only hard-coded to understand the US tax code.
Right. You need a platform that natively handles French, German, and Spanish. You need software that can dynamically adapt to the strict data privacy frameworks of the European Union, like GDPR.
While simultaneously handling the lending compliance rules of a dealership in Texas.
Exactly. IZMO has spent 2.5 decades patiently building out that labyrinth of localization.
Okay, let's synthesize the profile of this core engine before we move on. We're looking at an auto software company with captive Fortune 10 clients, incredibly sticky recurring revenue, a 25-year proprietary data moat of certified 3D models that generative AI can't easily replicate,
A massive geographic cost advantage in their AI development.
and an untapped global market. If we stop the analysis right here, the financial metrics should be pristine. They should be a textbook case study in software profitability.
On paper, yeah, the fundamental economics of their SaaS model are designed to print cash. But when you actually map out their financial architecture, you run into a very compelling and somewhat frustrating paradox.
Let's walk through that paradox, starting with the top-line trajectory, which looks undeniable. Looking at the growth profile, they reported FY23 revenue of 154 crore.
And that stepped up to 187 crore in FY24, and they're projecting to hit 225 crore in FY25.
Just to baseline this for our global listeners, 1 crore is 10 million rupees, which roughly translates to about 120,000 US dollars. So 225 crore is roughly $27 million in top-line revenue.
Right, which represents a very solid 19% three-year compound annual growth rate.
The top-line growth is highly consistent, and when you evaluate the underlying cost structure of their software, the primary fixed costs are heavily concentrated in research and development and platform development.
Those fixed costs represent roughly 60% to 70% of their total operating expenses.
Because they have to constantly pay engineers to build out new AI modules, update the interactive media scanners, and just ensure the platform remains competitive.
But once that foundational code is written, once the 3D model of a new Honda Civic is mathematically rendered and stored on the server, The variable costs to serve that software to one more dealership remain exceptionally low.
It's just incremental server bandwidth and hosting fees.
Exactly.
And as anyone who follows SaaS knows, they've got classic operating leverage here. Their 19% revenue growth is clearly outpacing their cost growth, so we should be seeing a ton of free cash flow.
So where is the friction in the system? Why doesn't the balance sheet reflect that operating leverage?
Well, the friction lies entirely within their working capital cycle. It's glaringly obvious in the financial data provided in the sources. The core issue dragging them down is their debtor days.
Debtor days.
Yeah. Simply put, IZMO is doing a fantastic job generating revenue on the income statement, but they're having a phenomenally difficult time actually collecting the physical cash from their clients in a timely manner. It is the absolute classic enterprise software trap. The bookings look amazing on the quarterly earnings deck, but the actual bank account doesn't match the enthusiasm.
The disparity is severe, actually. According to the data, their receivables, the money they are owed by their clients, are currently growing 4 times faster than their actual revenue growth.
4 times. That is an unbelievable divergence.
It really is.
Growing receivables 4x faster than revenue means the cash is essentially trapped on the balance sheet. I mean, auto dealers are historically notorious for stretching their payables. They'll use their vendors as a form of zero-interest financing by delaying payment to net 60 or net 90 terms.
Yep, and this level of trapped liquidity is a massive structural drag. Now, to their credit, the filings show they're managing this without taking on external liabilities. They operate with a zero debt-to-equity ratio.
Which provides a vital shock absorber. But still, a slow cash conversion cycle fundamentally restricts how fast a company can reinvest its organic cash flow. And that brings us to the most debated financial metric in these sources, their return on capital employed, or ROCE.
Currently, their ROCE is sitting at a rather sluggish 6.6%.
Which is significantly below the broader software industry average, which typically hovers around, 11% or 12%.
Yeah, around there. And even more concerning for a surface-level analysis, that 6.6% is actually a degradation over time. 5 years ago, their ROCE was sitting at 9.7%.
Okay, we need to unpack this ROCE paradox carefully because the underlying math reveals the entire strategy of the company. Does a 6.6% ROCE mean the core automotive SaaS business is actually failing, degrading, becoming fundamentally less profitable? Or is the denominator of that equation, the capital employed, just temporarily bloated because management is plowing massive, disproportionate amounts of capital into long-term R&D?
The sources confirm it's definitively the latter. IZMO is explicitly and intentionally sacrificing their short-term returns on capital. They're deliberately inflating that denominator by pouring immense amounts of capital into R&D.
And crucially, they're not just reinvesting to maintain the legacy auto software.
No, they're using those funds to completely bankroll their new ventures.
Which bridges us directly to the wild card. Because all of this trapped working capital, all of this sacrificed ROCE, all of this heavy R&D expenditure, it's not going toward building a slightly better 3D scanner for Ford Broncos.
Not at all. It's funding one of the most audacious, high-risk pivots we have ever seen in the mid-cap technology space.
This leads us to the creation of the IZMO Micro division. This is where the comfortable software company suddenly decides it wants to build hard physical technology.
And they're targeting the most complex hardware on the planet. The IZMO Micro vertical is focused on system in package, or SIP, semiconductor manufacturing.
Let's explain what system in package actually means, because it's a vital concept to grasp why this is so difficult. Historically, if you look inside a computer, you see a massive green motherboard.
Right.
And on that board, there are separate distinct silicon chips, a processor over here, a memory chip over there, a power management controller down in the corner. They all communicate with each other over microscopic copper wires printed on the board.
System in package fundamentally changes that architecture. CC takes all of those distinct integrated circuits and stacks them vertically, burying them together into one single, highly efficient, miniaturized module.
It's like taking a sprawling suburban neighborhood of single-family homes and stacking them into a high-rise apartment building where they all share the same plumbing and elevator shafts.
That's exactly it. It's a critical architectural leap for modern hardware. By moving the chips microscopic distances apart, you drastically reduce latency and power consumption.
And IZMO is specifically engineering these SIPI modules for some of the most demanding applications in the global economy. high-power motor control, advanced telecommunications, and high-density AI infrastructure.
And I want to emphasize, they're not just white labeling someone else's technology. They are not acting as a middleman or a consultant.
No, the sources indicate they have physically built and opened a Class 1000 clean room in Bangalore.
Right.
For the listener, Class 1000 clean room means the environment is hyper-filtered to allow a maximum of only 1,000 particles of zero point 0.5 microns or larger per cubic foot of air.
It's intensely clean.
A single rogue speck of dust or a stray human eyelash can completely destroy the microscopic alignment of a semiconductor package. Operating a facility like this requires an entirely different operational culture than managing a team of software developers writing code.
They are fully committed to physical manufacturing. And the technological claims they are making in these filings are staggering. They claim to have achieved 32-channel integration at 1 nanometer accuracy within their optical transceivers.
Okay, I have to stop you right there because I need to push back on this claim. 1 nanometer accuracy. We are talking about silicon photonics using actual lasers and light to move data instead of electrical currents over copper wires, which eliminates heat and massively increases bandwidth.
Yes.
But to do that, you have to align a microscopic glass optical fiber perfectly with a waveguide on a silicon chip. If you miss by a fraction of a hair, the light scatters and the chip is useless.
Right.
Companies like Intel and TSMC spend tens of billions of dollars a year employing armies of the smartest physicists on Earth to refine nanometer-scale manufacturing. Are we seriously supposed to believe that a mid-cap software company from Bangalore, famous for making dealership websites, just figured out 1 nanometer optical alignment in a newly opened clean room?
It is the natural skepticism any analyst would have, but it's crucial to distinguish between what IZMO is doing and what a foundry like TSMC does.
Okay.
IZMO is not fabricating the base silicon die. They're not trying to print transistors at a 1 nanometer node, which is what costs tens of billions of dollars in extreme ultraviolet lithography equipment. IZMO is doing the packaging. They are taking pre-manufactured silicon dies and aligning the optical fibers to them. Claiming 1 nanometer accuracy in the physical alignment and bonding process of the package is an assembly breakthrough, not a foundry logic breakthrough. It is still an incredibly difficult feat of precision engineering, but it's technologically plausible for a highly specialized team to achieve in a controlled clean room setting, independent of a massive fabrication plant.
Okay, that distinction is critical. They are innovating on the assembly and optical alignment, not trying to outcompete TSMC on printing raw transistors. And they're applying this packaging tech beyond just data centers. The sources highlight they have developed a 3D SiC module specifically designed for a space payload.
Yes, an aerospace application. And the key metric here is that this specific module reportedly reduces the physical footprint of the required components by 84%.
Which goes back to our apartment building analogy. By stacking the chips vertically and eliminating the sprawling printed circuit board, they compress the entire system.
And in the aerospace industry, where launching every single gram of weight into orbit costs thousands of dollars.
And where every millimeter of volume inside a satellite chassis is fiercely contested.
Right. An 84% reduction in physical footprint is an absolute game changer. They have the theoretical technology, they have the physical clean room, and importantly, they have massive macroeconomic tailwinds at their back.
Yeah, the Indian government has made semiconductor localization a matter of national security and economic policy through their Make in India initiative.
And IZMO has officially secured DSIR recognition. That's the Department of Scientific and Industrial Research. That designation formally validates their R&D operations in Bangalore and opens the door to significant governmental incentives, tax breaks, and structural support.
Which is absolutely essential because we need to examine the sheer scale of the financial ambition here. Why would the Sony family, who controls IZMO, risk their stable, profitable automotive software empire on something as notoriously difficult as semiconductor packaging?
It all comes down to the gravitational pull of the TAM, the total addressable market.
Let's look at those numbers because it explains the psychology of the pivot perfectly.
With their legacy automotive SaaS business, as profitable and sticky as it is, the market has a ceiling. Even if IZMO executes flawlessly and captures every major dealership group on Earth, the immediate addressable market for digital auto retail SaaS is estimated to cap out around $840 million.
It's a very nice, highly lucrative pond, but it has distinct boundaries.
Conversely, the semiconductor and AI hardware packaging market shatters those boundaries. That sector opens up a TAM estimated to be anywhere between $10 billion and $100 billion plus over the next decade. depending on how aggressively silicon photonics replaces traditional copper infrastructure in data centers.
They're looking at the regional swimming pool and deciding to jump headfirst into the middle of the Pacific Ocean.
Exactly.
The potential upside is virtually limitless. If they capture even a fraction of a percent of the global AI hardware supply chain, it dwarfs their entire software history. But the predators swimming in the Pacific are massive, and the currents are violent.
And management is fully embracing those massive expectations. Their stated target in these filings is to reach 500 crore in turnover within the next 3 to 4 years.
500 crore. That is more than double their current revenue base.
And their internal projections are even more aggressive regarding the hardware division. They project that this brand new IZMO Micro division could potentially match the revenue output of their entire 25-year-old legacy software business within just 36 months.
That is a staggering growth curve to project to the market. But this is exactly where the math of the dual-engine strategy hits a very hard, very cold reality wall.
Funding gap.
The capital expenditure requirement. To scale a Class 1000 clean room from a prototype facility to mass production, to hit those 32-channel optical transceiver yields consistently without massive defect rates, to become a certified, audited player in the global semiconductor supply chain, that requires an immense amount of upfront capex.
The sources explicitly note that IZMO needs to secure somewhere between 150 crore and 200 crore in fresh fundraising just to purchase the necessary alignment equipment and scale the R&D to make this vision a reality.
A requirement of up to 200 crore is basically equivalent to 100% of their entire annual top-line revenue right now.
Yeah.
And remember the working capital friction we analyzed earlier. Their cash is trapped, they're operating with zero debt, but their receivables are growing 4x faster than their revenue. You cannot fund a 200 crore hard tech capex requirement out of a cash flow stream that is tied up in net 90 payment terms from Ford dealerships.
No, you absolutely have to go to the external capital markets to raise this money.
Which means this entire dual-engine strategy rests on a razor's edge of execution. They need the legacy automotive business to hold perfectly steady to maintain market confidence. They need outside investors to fully buy into the semiconductor vision to fund the capex gap. And they need the engineering team to execute flawlessly on the manufacturing floor.
Right. So let's stress test the entire structure.
Okay, what breaks this? If we pull on the threads of this dual-engine strategy, what are the structural and macro risks that could completely break this company before the rocket even leaves the launch pad?
We have to start with the foundation, the vulnerabilities within the legacy automotive engine. If the cash cow gets sick, the moonshot is permanently grounded.
And the most glaring vulnerability there is macroeconomic cyclicality. We discussed how 72% of their legacy revenue is inextricably tied to North America.
The North American automotive market is notoriously intensely cyclical. It is highly sensitive to the broader economy. If interest rates remain elevated, if consumer credit tightens, or if there's a general macro slowdown, automotive sales slump immediately.
Right. When a consumer can't get an affordable auto loan, cars sit on the lot. And when cars sit on the lot, dealership margins compress instantly.
And what's the very first thing a massive dealership network does when their margins compress? They freeze all non-essential IT spending. They stop buying advanced predictive AI analytics. They delay the rollout of the fancy new 3D virtual showrooms. They stick to the bare minimum software required to keep the lights on.
And this isn't just a theoretical whiteboard risk. The forces point out that this exact macroeconomic dynamic has already bitten IZMO recently. A period of weak earnings momentum, driven directly by that sluggish, high interest rate environment in North American auto sales, drove a massive 25% plunge in their stock price.
When the North American consumer coughs, IZMO's balance sheet catches a cold.
Exactly.
The second major risk threatening the legacy engine is entrenched competition. IZMO has carved out a fantastic, highly profitable niche, but they're not operating in a vacuum. They face massive, multi-billion-dollar giants like CDK Global and Reynolds.
For context, companies like CDK Global are the central nervous system of a dealership. They provide the core dealer management system, the DMS. They handle the payroll, the accounting, the deep inventory logistics. IZMO's software, as advanced as it is, often sits on top of or adjacent to those massive DMS platforms.
And the strategic threat there is bundling. If a giant like CDK Global decides that IZMO's advanced digital retail tools and AI analytics are becoming a legitimate threat to their ecosystem, they have the balance sheet to aggressively underprice IZMO.
They could simply develop their own interactive 3D media tools and bundle them into their multi-year, multi-million-dollar core DMS contracts for free, essentially starving IZMO out of the dealerships.
If that happens, the vital SaaS cash flow begins to evaporate. And if the cash flow drops, the entire narrative supporting the semiconductor R&D vanishes with it.
Which brings us to the risks on the other side of the equation, the immense execution risks within the semiconductor division.
The predators in the Pacific Ocean.
Yeah. The most immediate risk is pure technology disruption. IZM is incredibly proud of their silicon photonics breakthroughs and their 1 nanometer alignment capabilities. But they are competing in an arena populated by absolute titans of industry.
If a massive player like Global Foundries or Intel, or an aggressive startup backed by billions in venture capital, commercializes a slightly better, cheaper, or faster packaging architecture, IZMO's proprietary technology could become obsolete overnight.
And even if their technology remains superior, they're at the mercy of the raw materials. The semiconductor supply chain is arguably the most complex and geopolitically sensitive logistics network on Earth.
Input volatility is a massive, uncontrollable threat. The profit margins on an early-stage manufacturing fab are razor-thin to begin with. If there is a sudden spike in the price of raw silicon wafers or a disruption in the supply of critical ultra-pure gases or rare earth metals due to geopolitical tensions in Asia,
Those thin margins get completely obliterated. You can't simply pass a sudden 40% increase in raw material costs onto an aerospace client who signed a locked, fixed-price contract for a satellite payload 2 years ago. The manufacturer absorbs that loss.
furthermore, there is a risk that I think is perhaps the most acute yet least discussed for a company attempting this specific kind of operational pivot.
I think we are looking at the same thing, key person risk.
Absolutely.
Because I look at the history of this company and I have to ask a fundamental cultural question. If the core DNA of IZMO for 25 years has been writing code, managing enterprise B2B sales cycles, and directing teams of CGI artists, who exactly is running this Class 1000 clean room?
Right. Building cloud software requires a completely different operational mindset, a different engineering culture, and a different tolerance for physical failure than managing nanometer-scale physical yields in a hardware fab.
The global talent pool for advanced silicon photonics packaging is incredibly small. Those engineers are fiercely sought after by every major technology company on the planet.
So even if IZMO managed to hire a brilliant, visionary team of hardware engineers to build this 32-channel module, what's the retention strategy?
Yeah, what happens if the lead photonics engineer gets offered a massive compensation package and gets poached by a U.S. tech giant or a well-funded AI startup? Does the entire IZMO micro division stall out?
The operational resilience of that newly formed hardware team is a massive, unquantified unknown.
And as if the operational and macroeconomic risks weren't enough, the sources also briefly flag some critical governance and regulatory issues lurking in the background.
The tax litigation wildcards.
Yeah. There are specific mentions of pending tax litigations and uncertain tax positions.
Operating a multinational IT services company from India involves incredibly complex transfer pricing regulations.
Essentially, the rules governing how an Indian parent company bills its U.S. or European subsidiaries for the software developed in Bangalore.
And the Indian tax authorities are notoriously aggressive regarding transfer pricing. Disputes over how revenue is recognized across borders can drag on in the appellate tribunals for years.
And they can suddenly result in retroactive rulings that trigger massive, unexpected cash outflow demands.
Which circles right back to the central theme of liquidity.
Right.
If you are a company already choking on massive receivables and you're desperately trying to convince the market to give you 200 crore to buy cleanroom equipment, suddenly getting hit with an unexpected multi-million-dollar tax penalty from the government could literally shatter the balance sheet.
When you aggregate the totality of these risks, the cyclical exposure of the auto sector, the looming threat of technological obsolescence, the fragile semiconductor supply chain, the cultural friction of the pivot, and the pending tax disputes, it becomes clear that executing this strategy requires immense, unshakable trust in the people steering the ship.
A corporate pivot of this magnitude is ultimately a bet on management's ability to allocate capital flawlessly under extreme pressure.
Which means we need to look very closely at the architecture of the leadership. Who is actually making these capital allocation decisions, and how is the broader market pricing their capability to pull this off? Let's analyze the promoters.
The driving operational force behind IZMO is the Sony family. The leadership structure is tightly held. You have Sanjay Prakash Soni serving as the CEO and managing director. Shashi Soni holds the position of chairperson, and Kiran Soni acts as the chief financial officer.
So we're looking at a deeply entrenched, family-run operation.
Very much so. The average management tenure across the executive leadership team is a remarkably stable 11.3 years. And collectively, the promoter group, the founding family, holds a combined ownership stake of around 35%.
A 35% promoter holding is serious skin in the game. When the Sony family makes the decision to risk trapped cash flows on a semiconductor cleanroom, they aren't just playing with institutional money, they're betting their own personal wealth alongside the retail and public shareholders.
That structural alignment of incentives is definitively a positive signal. It suggests they truly believe in the long-term viability of the hardware pivot. However, the expert analysis detailed in the sources notes a distinct lack of historical transparency regarding their granular capital allocation decisions over the years.
What does that lack of transparency look like in practice?
Well, when analysts evaluate a mature 25-year-old software company, they typically look for a documented track record of how management balances reinvesting in the business versus returning capital to the shareholders. But with IZMO, there was no clear, consistent history of dividend payouts or share buyback programs.
It's just been a steady, relentless drumbeat of organic reinvestment. Every unit of cash generated seems to get plowed right back into R&D. First, it was to build out the AI modules for frog data, and now, obviously, it's being funneled into the IZMO micro cleanroom.
A strategy of relentless reinvestment is perfectly acceptable to the market if the returns on that newly invested capital are exceptionally high. But as we dissected earlier, the current ROCE is sitting at a sluggish 6.6%.
The market is essentially being asked to take a massive leap of faith that this intensive reinvestment cycle into silicon photonics is going to eventually cross a tipping point and yield a structural step up in long-term profitability.
And if you look at how the broader stock market is currently pricing that required leap of faith, the stock chart is an absolute roller coaster. It's a visual representation of pure investor whiplash.
The volatility profile is staggering. If you zoom out and look at the macro view, they've delivered a phenomenal 1,246% return over the last 5 years.
That massive run-up was primarily driven by the peak hype cycle. The market aggressively bought into their initial announcements regarding the silicon photonics breakthroughs and the tantalizing promise of capturing a slice of the $100 billion AI hardware TAM.
But if you zoom in on the recent price action, it paints a violently different picture. Recently, the stock took a massive 31.97% drop in a single month, dragging the share price down to roughly 702 INR.
That is a severe correction, signaling a sharp shift in market sentiment.
And that price drop perfectly coincides with a severe contraction in their price-to-earnings multiple. Because when the market stopped looking at the theoretical TAM and started looking at the actual execution realities, specifically their Q3 FY26 margins, the financial picture gets incredibly thin.
Yeah, in the December quarter, they reported net income of just 0.02 crore on 10.77 crore of revenue.
A net profit margin of essentially zero, they barely scraped by.
The market was pricing them like a high-flying, infinite-margin AI semiconductor darling. But the quarterly reality revealed a company barely eking out a profit while choking on working capital and trapped receivables.
It seems the market has abruptly stopped giving them advanced credit for the theoretical AI future and has started heavily discounting the stock for the reality of the high debtor days and the massive execution risk of building a hardware fab.
The broader narrative shifted overnight. It went from, look at how big the total addressable market is, to show me the physical cash flow right now.
So, synthesizing everything we've unpacked today, what is the core takeaway for the listener? We've journeyed from 3D car renderings to space-grade semiconductor packaging, from 19% SaaS growth to near-zero quarterly profits. What is the ultimate read on IZMO Limited?
IZMO represents a fascinating, almost unprecedented case study of a legacy technology player attempting to self-fund a multi-billion-dollar moonshot. They possess a highly legitimate, incredibly hard-to-replicate cash cow in the U.S. and European automotive retail markets. The 25-year proprietary data moat they've built with IZMO Studio and the low-cost AI architecture of Frog Data are very real assets.
The foundation of the company is demonstrably solid.
But they're deliberately stretching their working capital to the absolute breaking point to chase advanced hardware manufacturing. They're betting their entire corporate legacy that they can sustain the auto software business through macroeconomic downturns while simultaneously solving nanometer-scale engineering challenges and outmaneuvering global semiconductor giants in a newly opened clean room in Bangalore.
It's a corporate high-wire act being performed without a safety net. If they succeed, they could fundamentally re-rate into a massive infrastructure tech giant. If they fail, the immense capex requirements of the hardware division could act as an anchor that drags the profitable 25-year-old software business down to the bottom of the ocean with it.
It's a binary outcome. It will either be studied as a masterclass in strategic pivoting or a cautionary tale of overreach.
Which leaves me with a broader, somewhat provocative thought to leave you with today. As we watch generative AI continue to relentlessly commoditize traditional software development, as code gets cheaper to write, as basic SaaS platforms get easier to replicate, and as the barriers to entry in software continue to fall, are we going to see more of this exact scenario play out?
It's a great question.
Will mid-cap, historically high-margin software companies realize their traditional moats are shrinking and essentially start acting like internal venture capital funds? Will we see a wave of legacy tech companies aggressively pivoting their trapped cash flows into capital-intensive hard-tech infrastructure like silicon photonics, robotics, or energy grids just to survive the next decade of AI disruption?
It is a profound structural question. The era of pure high-margin software might be forcing these legacy companies to build in the unforgiving physical world.
It really makes you wonder because ultimately you have to decide if this trend is a brilliant, necessary adaptation to the AI era or if it's just the reliable local accountant deciding to build a nuclear reactor in his backyard.